3, 2, 1.
Good morning and welcome to the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities webinar on education and disparities during the COVID-19 pandemic. I am Cheryl Sharp, the Deputy Director of the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. We are bringing you these live events, webinars every week to discuss the effects of the pandemic on our state of Connecticut as it relates to issues of disparate treatment and discrimination. And today we are joined by two experts in the field of educational opportunity. I'm also joined by my colleague, Attorney Michelle Dumas-Kuehler, who will introduce our guest and get us right into the discussion about education and disparities. Michelle?
Good morning, everyone. It's really great to have you all here today. This is the third webinar in the series of webinars that we have done as it relates to education and distance learning in Connecticut. And for the first week, we just kind of did a general overview. Last week was regarding children with disabilities and what distance learning is for them and resources associated with that. And so this week is going to focus solely on distance learning and equity, race, color, national origin. There's already a significant disparity in education as it relates to where people live in the state and access to services and poverty and wealth. And that tends to break down on race color lines. And so we wanted to present information and give information from two organizations that work in these areas, CHRO, which has been in attendance last week, and CONCAN, which also is another group that works on equity and education. And so our two speakers today are going to let you know what it is that they do and what their organizations are doing as it relates to this topic and in general, and provide some information and resources that may hopefully assist people as we navigate through this. Now, at this point, there will be no return to school this school year. The school year will conclude with students being at home. And so while it is slowly winding down, there are still a lot of lessons to be learned because, as we're all pretty aware, especially given the roundtable that occurred yesterday, education in the fall is not going to just be all of our children. My 3 children will not be running back to school. They will be probably engaging in some degree of in-school and distance learning going forward for the foreseeable future. And that may include summer, that may include times when school didn't exist. And so while this school year is going to conclude with all of our children at home, the next school year, we can learn from what's happening now to see what we can do to shape the next school year. Cheryl, any more comments? We'll get to our speakers.
Let's get to our speakers, and I hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy. Thank you for tuning in.
Our first speaker, okay. Our first speaker is Michelle LeBrun-Griffin, who works with CHRO, and I'm going to just leave it as a very brief introduction, and she can let you know what CHRO is doing as it relates to this issue and some other issues related to Public Act that passed last year that requires African American and Latino studies in the school system. So take it away, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle and Cheryl. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I will share Cheryl's sentiments in regards to I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. The State Education Resource Center actually is a little past our 50th year. We started in 1969 to actually service students with disabilities and their families in accessing school. Since then, we've obviously broadened our scope because we know students with disabilities don't sit in necessarily a separate education setting. And so that brought us to some changes in our direction and legislation in approximately 2010. in regards to our name change to the State Education Resource Center, and recognizing that students with disabilities aren't our most marginalized students in our state. And so there's a lot of intersection with students of color, students who are also English learners, students who also live in impoverished communities. And so it's very important to us that we support our school systems and our educators and administrators on the front line in supporting every child, each and every child, in their growth and progress and a successful schooling experience every day. So Michelle, as you said, this pandemic has brought us a new experience, certainly something that CHRO, or I don't know if any district in our state maybe saw on the horizon or was prepared for, even if they had a combination or a blended learning already happening in their buildings. So as you know, we have several districts across the state who are technologically sound and savvy and do have incorporated that into their learning. And then we have other districts who this is a very new venture to even get enough computers to have a one-to-one match for every student in their community. So that disparity, that difference is something that we're getting calls about every day. As you can imagine, as an agency who is surplus in resources for families and educators, not only through our CHRO library, but also obviously through our professional development, both in statewide, regional, and on-site training with small groups. We too are from our homes and working and engaging in this distance learning environment, just as we are in this moment, to communicate, collaborate, and support in the best ways that we can. Without taking up too much more time, Michelle, just to comment a little bit more about the legislation about the Black and Latino course of studies. That's actually a high point for us because this pandemic has given us greater opportunity to bring people together in the virtual environment versus face-to-face, variety of stakeholders to continue in that work. So that work is predominantly centered around providing an experience for all of our high school students through an elective. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of feedback, Spencer. Through an elective experience that would be a combination of an African American and Puerto Rican Latino course of studies. Right now, it will exist as a full year course. Districts will have an opportunity to implement it in the 21-22 school year, but must be at least offering it by the 22-23 school year. We have been able to engage virtually through a variety of focus groups with educators, students, family, community members, Board of Ed members, administrators, to give us a little bit of a perspective about what's currently happening in some courses that are being implemented across the state in either area, but then also to tell us what topics and concepts are of the most interest and what they envision and hope for the opportunities for our youth in the benefits and outcomes of a course and experience like this. So it's been very exciting to be hearing from our students, to be hearing from our educators in ways that maybe we wouldn't have been able to before in more limited face-to-face time. So thank you, Michelle, for allowing me to introduce myself.
Michelle, you are still muted. Can't hear you, but we can see your lips moving.
Our next speaker is Sapira Gordon, who is the executive director of Cognac, which is a nonprofit organization that seeks to find equity, regardless of where you live in Connecticut, for school-age children. So take it away, Sapira. Actually, I think we lost Sapira. Now that I'm like, oh, here we go.
Oh, I'm back. No, I'm back.
Hi, Sapira.
Hi. Technical. I was trying to listen on the computer and somehow lost you there. English transition.
So please let us know what you are doing over at Cognac regarding all of this that's going on around us.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to everyone. So initially here at Cognac, I describe it as we were kind of like a school district, thinking that this will be a couple of weeks, we'll roll into, doing what we do from home, which is a lot of this work is legislative advocacy, and then things will get back to normal. And, that's not happening, and it's probably not going to happen for the fall. So we quickly pivoted into really doing a compilation of looking at all the distance learning programs that the state has, that different districts have provided, and going through all their websites. And as Michelle said, it's kind of like, it depends on where you are. You might get a whole host of websites for parents to go to guide their child through distance learning. Some districts have kind of a very spelled out curriculum that they're offering, and with teachers calling and checking in every day and making sure that kids are doing okay. And so it depends on where you are in the state. And this is one of those things where high resource districts they don't necessarily have it figured out. But one thing is that the parents have the resources, or the school district have the resources to help guide their child through whatever it is that the school district was presenting. It's gotten better. It's still not perfect. You hear stories from, sometimes where there are devices or device in a home and there's multiple kids. And a lot of students are visual learners. A lot of students need some sort of a hands-on connection to be able to learn. And the State Department of Education is doing the best that they can, but I think there needs to be a little bit more of guidance put out from the State Department of Education around something as simple as like video-based calls. Some schools are doing it, some school districts are saying they can't do it because of security issues, and then where there's the largest disparity right now is with special ed. Special education students are just falling through the cracks, and if a student has a lot of needs, we're not seeing those being met in most cases. And I think that is probably where the most work needs to be done at this moment. Connectivity is incredibly important. A lot of districts are saying they created this hotspot. Parents please drive to the hotspot. We're talking about that in communities where parents don't have cars, they don't have access to reliable transportation. So driving to a hotspot is not necessarily something that parents can do. So we're trying to work to figure out how can there be reliable internet access, because the reality is distance learning is only successful when there is connectivity. And we've done a survey all across the state, lots of different, I think so far we've gotten 150 people have responded, and it's kind of a mixed bag. In some places, I think, like everything, excellent teachers are excelling and doing great. Not great at quickly adapting is what I would say, or just being able to figure out how to connect online and teach a lesson that you had thought of teaching in a classroom. We've seen, it's mixed results. Some parents think their teachers are doing great. Other parents a level of expectation about what is distance learning, what is it not, what should parents expect, and how do we move forward. So if we're going to be coming in the fall with, as the committee said yesterday, school is not going to look like what it looked like in January. How can we make sure that those districts who are not high resource districts and those parents who do not have lots of resources are able to also access a high quality education from their homes? And we need to make sure that everyone is prepared to learn whenever school opens back up. So that's kind of what we're hearing. And it's been interesting. I have 2 kids at home as well, and we're all trying to manage the education and the schooling and teaching division, which I am horrible at math, and it's just been a very interesting experience.
My question to the both of you is, well, I have a couple questions. One would be, what, without identifying any school district, what do you see as some best practices that school districts have put in place in order to, I mean, nothing's perfect. And as I said, I have 3 kids who are I have an 8th grader, a 5th grader, and a 3rd grader. So I have the spectrum. And I see how they're learning and what is going on in the town that I live in. But what do you see as best practices, things that other towns should try to replicate as we move towards the summer and the fall? That's happening in towns that is replicatable, I guess, too. Some of it is just it's a money issue, in that the towns don't have the money to, buy a Chromebook for every student in town or do something to that extent. So what are you seeing that you think are things that towns are doing that are transferable and successful?
So one thing I will say, there's a school district that does a survey at the end of every week and asks parents how it's going. That's been one of the things that I think and parents from that district will tell you they've watched the process transform as a result of the feedback. That costs no money. It's just a matter of sending out a survey. And not even if everyone responds, the number that do respond will help this district shift and be more react to what parents need. And from that school, I believe it's Windsor. And parents will just tell you, like, it's been great. They felt like they were listened to, and initially it was just too much work. They were trying to translate the initial school day, like the 6-hour school day. And based on the feedback that they got from parents, they no longer have class. They no longer are required to do work 5 days a week. They were doing work 3 days, I think, and there's 2 catch-up days. But they've just transformed so I think that's something. A lot of other things require resources, but that's one of those things that I think every single district should be able to do. And then places where there's live lessons, I don't know, like the live lessons have been, I think every district or every parent that we've talked to who had the opportunity for their child to have live interaction with their classmates and with the teacher, that has specifically, like if you're a parent who's working from home and you get 45 minutes where your child is being occupied by their teacher, that is a great thing for all of us. Right? But that's something where it's not, I understand that, all parents don't have access to a device, but making it available for even questions, problem solving. Sometimes you need access to, a parent might not know how to explain a certain thing, but making it available for those who can has been something that I think is easily adaptable for districts as well.
I agree. Michelle?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking of, priority-wise, because there's a lot of different things that I think, as I mentioned, our schools and districts are evolving as they're learning how to do this, right? So I think the key thing that Sabira said is the flexibility. And so you have some homes that are sharing a computer, right, between 3 siblings. You have some homes, as was recognized, that are taking care of siblings and not getting to work until the evening. And so having that flexibility of an extended day, and so it's not a 7 to 2 high school anymore, right? And so some kids might be sleeping later, so the other siblings are getting up and working in the morning, or the family member or guardian is home later after they're from work, or vice versa, so that they could support the navigation with the technology. So some of what I'm seeing that is causing an inequity alone, despite the learning that is being provided, whether it's, live or, a task completion type thing, is just the navigation on the technology itself. So dependent on the platform, and then if you're going out to different platforms. And so a lot of the discouragement and the frustration and the finesse and that will come over time, certainly, but it's novel right now, right? And so where I'm clicking and what I'm clicking and, how I'm submitting assignments or how I'm getting into that live session is a lot of figuring out. So what's been successful for some systems that we've worked with is they've separated some of that technology piece out from the teacher and put in what's called like a tech hotline. So then they have their central office supporting homes and schools and parents and students themselves with that whole tech piece. And so then some might ask, well, what about, kids who don't have the technology and are being sent or picking up packets? So same types of things in regards to there's some type of outreach that is happening in a very personalized way, so that homeschool connection is just not through a device. And I think the schools that are really attending to the social emotional well-being and the balance of care for our youth, and the recognition that Sabira said that this can't be, a 8-period day like a typical school day, that we are really looking at blocked days. We are looking at not more than 3 hours of time for our older students within a day to be on the technology. So there should be active engagement and learning where you're asking them to go outside, and research and lab and phys ed and, experience, talk to, grandparents about, this history. So a lot more authentic types of experiences are things, again, versus a completion task that I think are being more successful with our teachers in our schools.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
What do you think over time, and thank you both for your comments so far. It's been really enlightening, and we really appreciate it. I'm excited about the additional education that will be related to African American and Latino students' history. I'm excited about some of the remote learning possibilities, but what do you think will be the equalizer? Because we have some schools who started remote learning 5 or so weeks ago, and other schools who started last week. And so I'm wondering how is that going to look in the future if we're going to continue with this distance learning when you already have a gap in time where students were not necessarily being educated in the traditional way?
Cheryl, that's the $1 million question, right? And
Yes.
that's what administrators are calling us about, and even from districts, Cheryl, where there may be a lower incidence of students of color or English learners or, people who aren't yet citizens. And so this is the crux that has actually, I think, exacerbated some of our inequities in our communities and across our state. And so that realization is so much in the forefront and in the faces and minds of every educator. I mean, you're hearing it from our commissioner every single day. You're hearing it from every administrator, board conversation. If you're, attending to those types of things, if you're talking and speaking and having opportunities with educators and parents, this is the outcry right now. And so I'm hopeful. I think the agency of the State Education Resource Center is hopeful that, as awful as this pandemic is and as much loss as we've had, and I know that's not the topic for this discussion, but I think this is a pivotal opportunity for us to change the experience of schooling like we've never done before, so that every child has a successful experience from here forward.
Right. I know that they have on Mondays now reading with Michelle Obama for elementary school students,
Yes.
And she reads them a story. So I know that that's a resource that people may not be aware of. And I know in my town that they have the remote learning. They do the Google classrooms for elementary all the way through. They have you can pick up packets. You can packets of information. They have like a drive-through, almost like a drive-through window where you can get packets for the students. They also have the Google Meets with the entire class. They have Google Meets for reading and writing, individual meetings. For special education students, they have 2 or 3 people assigned to look at the needs and set up a curriculum that's consistent with their IEP. But I live in a suburban town, and so I was just comparing what was happening here to what was happening to one of my friends who lives in in a city where they had not started the remote learning. And I know that it had been here for at least 5 or 6 weeks. And so that was one of the major concerns, because when you look at the students here in the town that I live in, their majority, the majority of the students are not students of color, whereas the town where my friend, or the city where my friend lives, most of the students are students of color. And so it is of great concern, and there are resource issues. And I'm just wondering how we can get around that. Oral histories are certainly important. Talking to grandparents about history, that puts things into context for kids. Giving students of color an education that's based on some of their history, where they can see the greatness that we are as a people, and our contributions to this American society certainly helps. There's no question about it. If you have high self-esteem, it drives you to want to do better, want to learn more, and want to be a part of eventual solution to the disparities. But the issue now seems very, very cumbersome. And just wondering, Sabira, what do you plan, or what does your organization plan in terms of tackling this just mammoth issue?
So we're thinking of a few things. It's really important, like the disparities are just like, I keep saying, all the disparities that existed are just, they are rearing their ugly heads even more now than they have before. And this is, if you live in a district that has, lots of resources, you're getting an experience similar to what your town's getting. And then if you're not, you're just not. You're getting packets and you fill them out. You don't send them back to anyone, and it's like there's no accountability. How we're looking at this is it's an opportunity to recreate the system, but it's also an opportunity for the state to lead, like the State Department of Education to set this expectation and take some of the, we're just in a state where, superintendents and districts kind of get to do what they want, and there's no check anywhere. Like there's not a checks and balances in the system. So we've been thinking about like, how can the State Department of Education set their ground rules and kind of set their expectations that districts then have to follow. What's been frightening for me is that as you look at this, there is no accountability in the differences and the disparities that have been happening. So right next to each other, you will have a Cheshire and a Waterbury, and the experience in Cheshire and the experience in Waterbury are drastically different. There you will have a Fairfield and a Bridgeport, and the experiences between those two districts are incredibly different. So while we don't have a solution, we've just been trying to collect all of that information and think about how we can do something moving forward and make sure that the State Department of Education is leading in the response for the fall and not letting the districts kind of do what they think is right, because I don't think the districts are equipped to make these decisions that will even things out all across the board, because it's just not, the resources aren't there. And a lot of this is not resources in money, it's resource in talent and understanding like what's best in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
so just to add to that, Sabira and Cheryl, I just came, as Sabira was speaking, I in some of the districts she was mentioning, we have figured it out on the food side, right? So for instance, when our schools were closed for spring break, many schools were closed, or districts were closed for the April break. We had some systems who discontinued their food service or their breakfast lunch programs during that time because they didn't have the means. But what happened was boards of ed superintendents reached out to neighboring districts and say, are you able to continue your food service through the spring break? Do you mind if, would you agree to our providing this opportunity for some of our families to access that support during this time that we can't? And there was a mutual agreement, and that happened. And so no family in that neighboring community was left without, bread and water on their table, which, humbles me greatly, right? And so my wonder is if we're attending to, again, the physical needs in a very astute way, in a very unprecedented way, in a very collaborative way. Could we be doing the same on the education end or on the teaching end, right? And so when we don't see the wealth of resources, or as Cheryl, you're saying, the delay or lag in time that teaching and learning experiences are getting to our youth in our communities, maybe in our larger communities, our larger urban centers, how could we start collaborating with museums and collaborating with other districts and collaborating with our historians and collaborating with our universities and higher ed and our scientists, right? And start bringing that information into these communities that maybe our teachers aren't yet ready or don't have the technology wherewithal or the actual physical capacity within some of these districts to do that. Our universities do. Our wealthier districts do. They're doing this for their own students anyway, right? And so I think it's time to break down those barriers. So a Waterbury that sits across or in between a Cheshire and a Woodbury and very, different types of districts. What an opportunity for all of us to be extending our hand to support all of those students and families in different ways, just in the same ways that we've done to be sure that all of our families are fed. An idea to explore? Absolutely. Can the State Department drive and organize that? Yes. We have experience and history with interdistrict partnerships, particularly in our magnet work, that have been extremely successful. We have interdistrict projects through our REST programs. CERC has actually had sister schools and partner districts working in our racial equity work that have looked very different in demographic and composition and resources from each other. But through that networking, they have excelled and evolved and supported each other in new ways of thinking that they had never had before. So Cheryl, that's an idea that I extend, that maybe we all should pursue collaboratively in supporting our districts and moving forward.
Michelle, I think that's a wonderful idea. Sharing of the resources. It may not even cost anything for the resources to be shared in some of the curriculum and some of the live events, and the opportunity to be taught by teachers, and like Sabira said earlier, give the parents 45 minutes or so where they can just wholly focus on their work that they're doing, and the child could have instruction, even if they're not in the class. I know in my district that was one of the things that all of the teachers in the lower grades got together, and they were doing like this collaborative teach out, I'll call it, where various teachers were providing instruction to not only their class, but students in other classes within their district. And so it took some of the pressure off individual teachers, but it was such a robust experience, it seems, for the students and the young people that benefited from it. There still are concerns, of course, regarding the no access to technology, which would then still be prohibitive, because if you don't have a computer, or you're sharing a computer with multiple siblings, and you get maybe an hour on it a day, and then there are 4 or 3 hours of work to do, it makes it really difficult. And I'm wondering what we can do about that type of lack of resource issue, which then deepens the gap and widens the disparity, because that's what a fear we have in terms of getting multiple complaints filed with our agency, is that some of these disparities are going to result in complaints of discrimination because of a lack of access, or a failure to meet the needs of a special education student. And we are trying to, through these webinars, offer resources to people so that there wouldn't be this huge influx of complaints, so that we can deal with it from the training and education and outreach side, as opposed to the complaint taking and enforcement side of our mission. So that's one of the things that the CHRO is trying to focus on. And I wanted to point out too that we had earlier, every year we have our Connecticut Kids Speak, where students can participate and write an essay. We are going to be holding our Kids Court competition remotely this year. So any student who is in middle school or high school who writes a 1 to 2 page essay can submit it to me at Cheryl, CHERYL .sharp, SHARP @ct.gov, and we will have our virtual Kids Court competition for students who have access, or even if the paper is mailed into our office, we will accept papers that are handwritten and mailed in as well. So we are trying to provide an opportunity for students to think about civil rights and disparities in this pandemic, and that's one of the topics for our Kids Court competition this year. So we're excited about that, but we are definitely humbled in trying to work with our partners to figure out a way to deal with these deep disparities that are affecting and ravaging communities of color. Because when the pandemic is no longer front page news, we don't want these students to be the carnage that's left after the pandemic because of the widening gaps in educational opportunity.
Cheryl, such great wisdom that you have, and I always value that of you and centering us in that regard. In regards to the hardware, there were discrepancies pre-COVID in our state. And so I guess my questions is, why weren't we receiving the outcry and requests or discrimination complaints then? Mm-hmm. And so now, right, as you're mentioning, they're even more disparate. However, we also just got 60,000 Chromes or laptops donated to our state. Again, why didn't that happen before? And so I think how we're ensuring that those computers and laptops are getting into the hands of our students of color specifically is a task that we, have a professional responsibility for, every, one of us on this call and obviously in the audience, to be sure that the resources are being provided to the right students and the right families, so that we don't see the continuation of the disparity or the growth of the disparity any further than it already has been historically. We don't want it to perpetuate, as you mentioned, or get any more egregious. So that's from a hardware perspective. Mm-hmm. From the perspective in regards to the teaching and learning and the access, some of what CERC is doing in the calls and requests that are being received is we are actually more so than ever engaging in conversations around racial equity and implicit bias with departments, with staff, with teams of administrators on a more frequent basis, beginning to engage in that conversation, because what was, again, maybe an experience where we were having is now even more evident. And I haven't yet met an educator who, is harmed by that, or is sensitized by that, is concerned about that, and doing all they can to reach a child. Again, I hope that the collaborations, as an agency, we're an agency of 38. We can't do it alone. So I think collaborations like what is happening within the state and maybe needs to happen more of through maybe organizations like CONCAN, with the State Department, and with the hyper focus and hypersensitivity on what we're doing in regards to supporting our students and youth of color.
Yes, thank you for those comments, Michelle. We don't want the situation to get any more grave than we feel that it is right now. I think that certainly the education the educational statute that was passed that will inspire students of color when they are getting history about our contributions to this society will certainly help. Part of what the issue is, or certainly was when I was in elementary and middle and high school, which was a few years ago, maybe many years ago, was that there were not enough images, that not enough exposure, not enough information, not enough history about the contributions that people of my ancestry and background, the information was lacking. It wasn't there. I got it in my home as opposed to the schoolhouse. And I think it's important everywhere for kids to see someone doing something great, who shares their background, shares some of their history. It inspires, it gives you a confidence, it makes you actually strive to learn more, strive to be a part of greatness, because you know where you came from. And I think it's so important. That's why I'm so excited about CHRO's work on creating the curriculum. And I'm so happy to hear too that you're doing these roundtable discussions and getting information from the schools and the parents and the students and all of the stakeholders who will be affected. I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. There could not be a better step into any direction than that. So I feel that will certainly help. I don't know why it takes this type of deep crisis for people to acknowledge that there are disparities. I don't know why it takes this type of deep crisis for people to reach out for assistance. But what I do know is that as the disparity comes to light and more people acknowledge it, and it has more of an effect on greater numbers of people, it does affect the work that our agency does. It affects our enforcement. It creates more opportunity, but it also creates more work for the agency. But that's why we're here. Our mission is to eliminate discrimination through enforcement, education, and advocacy. And so we strive to do that. But we know in the days and weeks and months ahead that there's going to be substantially more work to do in this area.
Yes, and just a comment.
Go ahead,
Sabir. No,
no, it was Michelle. All of you comment. We do have some questions, so I'll pose them to you after.
Okay, I just wanted to comment, Cheryl, about the curriculum, just to echo what you were saying in regards to students seeing themselves. So one thing that has come not only through the work of the advisory group, of which we have about 150 stakeholders from across the state, through the focus groups, it has been loud and clear that experience of students of color seeing themselves in their learning, and not seeing themselves just from an experience of oppression, but from an experience of activism and reconstruction and contribution and asset, very strengths-based perspective is what the whole idea behind this course is, right? Because if students have and feel that experience, the heightened engagement in our education for those youth will be increased, obviously, and improved over time. Because I think when all I see, when we know in Connecticut our teaching force is 91, maybe 92% white, we need to be providing those opportunities and those, again, experiences, not just through this course. And so this course will certainly be pivotal, but these are things that we could be doing and incorporating in our teaching and learning right now, today, to support and broaden students' worldview beyond their own communities.
Excellent point, Michelle. We're going to go to our first question, which is accompanied by a statement. If high-speed internet or wireless were treated as a public utility, so it could be available to everyone, possibly provided by municipalities to people with low income, students would have better remote access to online education and other services. Could that be a future legislative proposal to increase equity statewide? What do you and Sabira feel about that, Michelle?
I don't want to be the only speaker. Sabir, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just
Okay.
trying to help my son with some work while I was listening. So we believe that just like schools have internet, a function of distance learning is connectivity. So we believe that every child should have access to the internet, and it should be a right and a public good. Minneapolis, I think, is where it does it. There's a few states across the country that there's free Wi-Fi for all. We believe that that should be a public good here in Connecticut as well. So
I would say I'm thrilled about that idea, and I would be privileged to work with whoever presented that idea to work with some legislators to make it happen. So please be in touch with me directly. I would like to be on that bill.
So let me highlight the greatness of one of our employees. This is one of the attorneys from our legal department, Robin Fox, who made that suggestion. So Robin, now you have an additional assignment so that we can try to move this forward.
Another question we had to do with the actual computers themselves and what you were speaking about before, Michelle, and that is if there could be, or you know of, inter-district sharing of technology, because it may be that, like everything else, the laptop may be something not being used in one town, but that another town would want it because they don't have they have many more students and maybe not the budget to cover it. Do you know of any districts that are sharing their technology in order to provide computers to students who otherwise may not have them?
So two things I'm aware of. Each district right now is doing their inventorying, right? And so not only of their hardware, but also of their surplus in dollars and how, those monies will be expended and supported. So can I say that a district's going to offer fiscal resources? I don't know. But will they be looking at that surplus and how they could pool that? And again, regionally, I do know that is something that is currently being discussed. I would also say as our state starts to open up, right? So things like our museums and our libraries, our common spaces, that access to technology will also be, reduced, right? Because you have other points besides what's in your home in order to access that technology. So right now, it's because all of the public service is not available, which is what's providing, that greater need currently.
Mm-hmm. Sabira, have you heard anything about that?
actually, no, but I think it's an interesting idea. I do know, so what I do know is that the federal government, the state has gotten an influx of resources from the federal government. And I'm not going to say it's a lot of money,
Right.
but it's some resources. And I do think that a lot of districts are thinking about using some of these resources to purchase devices if they don't already have some. And while, the federal government, you could be critical about what they're doing and what they're not doing, but they have been really trying to provide some resources to the states, so the states can at least get everyone to have a device to work through this.
Okay.
And I think it's part of our CARES Act, how the CARES Act funding, so the State Department's proposal and how those monies are used, part of it obviously is for the technology supports.
Part of it.
Yeah.
And I think, it's like everything else. I mean, where, we don't necessarily need things, we want things. And it may be that towns want things as opposed to really need them. And if they, if they do get those things and they have this extra resource that is still working, then it would be a shame that it just sits in, you know, a room somewhere when at this point really everybody can use it. And so, and there's another question that's kind of a regionalization. The regionalization of our schools have been a topic for a long time now. And so one of the questions is, because our public education is financed by local property taxes, do you think that, again, another regional approach to education might be considered by, you know, municipalities that are close to each other? And I'm just going to add in, given kind of the disparities that we all knew existed, but that have starkly come to light through this situation. Do you think there'll be any push again for regional education and the funding that the towns provide to be pooled instead of used for their own towns?
So this is opinion versus fact.
That's fine.
I think it's, yeah.
I was going to say the same thing.
I want to preface that, right? So I'm talking as Michelle, as a community member and parent. I think it's going to come, Michelle, out of necessity versus requirement, right? So just as I was describing about the food service piece, in my own community, just for fiscal reasons, we have combined our health coordinator or health department with a neighboring community. So, you know, no longer do we have a director and staff. We actually share that director and staff. And, you know, so you'll see signs across our community that, you know, about social distancing, and it is signed off on by Community A and Community B health department. We've also had very similar regionalization within our community in regards to human resource. So no longer do I have a human resource coordination and staff for the district and a human resource coordination and staff for the town. That is now human resource across the municipality. So I do think we are, out of necessity, Michelle, going to need to start thinking wiser, so that our dollars are stretched farther, and so that these types of issues that we're describing in regards to hardware, software, you know, public connectivity, et cetera, go away. Particularly because we're in the long haul in this, you know. So, you know, we just heard that this is, you know, we're not going to return, you know, for back to school on September 1. You know, so we are going to need to look differently, which, you know, kind of parrots what I said in the beginning of the conversation, is as much despair as this has brought us, is I am so hopeful for the opportunity for us to be working and living in different ways than we ever have before.
Great, thanks. Sabira, what are your thoughts?
So my thoughts are also, once again, speaking as myself, not as ConCan. We are one of the few states that have multiples of everything for very few students in certain places. Mm-hmm. And it does not make sense to have the Connecticut and its provincial way of providing education is not necessarily the most effective. And while a top-down regionalization approach might not be the solution, I think out of necessity, we should be thinking about, similarly to how we're saying, you know, if District A has a really good online curriculum, we should be sharing that with District B. I think we should be thinking about what's the most effective way of delivering services and delivering education, specifically now that we are in a world where the physical school building is not indicative of education, which is what we've transformed to. And I think it lends itself to thinking about how can there be better use of resources when the delivery of education is not tied to a specific building. So I think we should be innovating. Another thing, I mean, I keep saying the federal government, the feds have put out a grant that allows states to come up with innovation, and there's like $300 million, which is not a lot of money when you think about all the states. Right. But it could be a great way for states to think about how can we deliver resources better through a virtual environment, and that, I think, could equalize some of the inequities that we have in our state.
Mm-hmm. That's great. All right, so the last question we have is related to just assistive technology and whether how if you're aware of how the towns are handling situations where it's not even just a Chromebook, it is assistive technology for children with disabilities, and whether that is something that's how that is happening, whether it's happening or not, and to the extent it is. I don't know if either of you can comment on that.
So I can comment real quick. I'm going to have to transition to 11 o'clock live stream for my son. But what I do know is that in some districts that we have heard where, like, there's one conversation we have with a parent whose child has a compromised immune system. So she's had to be dealing with the district for years with assistive technology. In some places, like everything, it's working because there is a dedicated person in central office that's making sure that this is happening. In other places, not so much. So I think there is, as I think I've mentioned earlier on, special education is one of those places where the ball has been dropped all across the state. And I think through the summer will be a really good time for there to be, I think, we should be delivering special education in different ways. That is specifically a place where I think there should be more of a regional approach. And I do think that there's a lot of work to be done with thinking about how special needs students are faring in this pandemic.
Great. That's great. Thank you. Michelle, would you like to comment?
Yeah, that's a great. I think the use of assistive technology going back to pre-pandemic has varied, right? So it was certainly provided to our most medically fragile, our students with communication needs, so that even though obviously the hardware or the assistive technology itself belonged to the district, it was a one-to-one with the student. So it went home with the student, right? So we should see all of those students, again, with those significant disabilities, with that equipment afforded to them for the long term. But I think what I'm hearing you ask, Michelle, in regards to, the low-tech, high-tech assistive technologies, how are we now beginning to see that across the board for access for all learners, but particularly and specifically in explicit ways for our learners with disabilities. And that is something, as Sabira is commenting, that level of consistency and that level of understanding is one of the, second maybe frequently asked questions in regards to the racial inequities for students with disabilities as well. But in regards to the use of the assistive technology and how much it could benefit and support our learners in this new, asynchronous environment. And so that is something, like Sabira said, getting our assistive technology workforce, work groups, task force teams, within our schools, each community or district has something like that, to, sort of surface those groups, recalibrate those groups, retool those groups. I know the CERC library has an extensive resource list specifically for all of the assistive technology tools that are available, electronically, digitally, online, platform type thing that vary the gamut for things for students, with speech needs, for things with students with organizational needs. So please access that resource list, and that's something or a LibGuide that I could even send to you, Michelle, after the call.
That'd be great, and we can post it onto our website. If either of you would like to send us any information, it will be posted on the CHRO's website at www.ct.gov/CHRO. Under COVID-19 tab is where the webinar resources are, so that would be awesome. Thank you. That is the end of our questions. Cheryl, would you like to say some parting words?
Sure. Thank you so much to Sabira and Michelle and the other Michelle from CHRO for participation in this webinar. The information that you provided is invaluable. Everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities is here as a resource to our stakeholders and to the communities that we serve throughout the state of Connecticut. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. Take
Bye-bye.
care.